Here, and it's time to go through the morning's papers. And to do that with us this morning is the political commentator, Jack Rowlett. Jack, good morning.
Good morning.
What do you make of today, then, this visit, all these European leaders and Zelensky going to the White House? Is it a show of strength or one of desperation, to your mind?
I think it's probably a mixture of the two. I think it's good that Zelensky's not going to be on his own, that he is supported by true allies in Washington today. But I think really the position Europe finds itself in is one of weakness because we've allowed ourselves to rely on America for too long. I think the real message from this crisis is that Europe needs to find strategic independence from the US. We need to be able to defend ourselves and our allies without having to rely on the whims of people in Washington. I think it's sort of demonstrative of what a sniveling embarrassment of a country the United States has become, that you have someone like Steve Witkoff, Trump's Ukraine envoy, saying that they secured a concession on Friday to be able to offer Ukraine a sort of Article 5 style protections, as if they need permission from Putin in order to do that. The United States is no longer standing up for democracy and freedom. Unfortunately, I think Ukraine is in a position where it is probably going to lose more territory if it doesn't do a deal. So it needs to sort of make the best of a bad situation, accept that it is going to lose some territory, unfortunately, and be looking towards the future and securing a security guarantee, hopefully from Europe as well as America. Because that might be worth the paper it's written on, and hopefully European countries, Britain and France, need to be prepared to offer some form of nuclear guarantee as well.
And the issue, I suppose, is that with Europe stepping up, you might argue that countries like the UK, France, Germany are almost in the worst position in that they don't agree with a deal that is still reported, and, we don't know the full facts. Maybe it will turn out to be a blinder by Donald Trump. But if they haven't agreed to this deal, but they will be the ones funding any security guarantee afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really unfortunate position, but alas, it's the consequence of policy decisions that have already been made. And I think international relations, foreign policy, it's very much an exercise in the possible. I think we have to be looking to the future and the medium term to ensure that this type of situation can't happen again. And actually, as kind of worrying as Russia's behavior is, we know that it is going to take them probably, at least a sort of 5-year time horizon to rearm. They've lost a tremendous amount of resources, a tremendous amount of manpower fighting in Ukraine. So Europe does have some sort of time on its side to prepare. We just need to make sure we do use that time to rearm, to kind of get strategic independence from the United States, and to ensure that there's a joined up plan between European allies, so we don't see sort of duplication of kind of military production, so we can ensure that it's actually spread effectively across the continent and we're kind of moving in one direction together. The most important thing is that we can't let this happen again. Europe needs to be in a much stronger position. We need to not be reliant on the United States in future, and the focus in Washington today needs to be on ensuring that we don't find ourselves in that position again, and we make the best of a bad situation now.
We'll hear from Ukraine and from London after past on Early Breakfast. A few of you getting in touch. Mike, the thing about a ceasefire is, given their track record, could you expect Putin and by extension the Russian army to honour it? I don't think so, says Mike. Mark's prediction: Europe may chastise Europe for expanding NATO towards Russia in order to curry favour with Putin and lull Putin into coming to the table. I suppose the interesting thing there, Mark, is will that be something that Trump actively believes, or is that might be your suggestion? Maybe I'm implying too much from this, that it's a sort of tactic to try to win over Putin, even if you don't actually think it. Dave, I'm not hopeful for Volodymyr Zelensky's chances in the Oval Office if he's relying on Starmer. After seeing Starmer's performance in Scotland with Trump, basically he was like a lemon on that occasion. Hopefully Maloney and Stube can save the day. But again, the answer, Dave, just to sit quietly and hope Donald Trump doesn't have a go at you? It seems that fighting him can rile him up, even if it's frustrating for people watching at home. Interesting you mentioned Stubb, the Finnish Prime Minister. Oliver Moody last week, who's the Times' Berlin correspondent but has great knowledge of the Scandinavian states and the Baltic states, says that Stubb has this incredible rapport with Donald Trump. They play golf together. So it's interesting that he is included in this list of European big hitters when Finland isn't ordinarily one you would include. Let's just touch on some of the other stories today. Jack, we heard in the news earlier, Rachel Reeves is going to try and scale back some environmental protections in order to boost the economy. It's something we've heard from the government a lot over the last year. She says it's a win-win, though, in that you can, or the Labour minister says it's a win-win. Developers will pay into a system to offset environmental damage. It seems to me, though, that you can't relax planning rules and protect the environment. It's one or the other, and surely it's about making a difficult choice.
Well, I think quite the opposite. I think actually, if you're, if you're living far away from where you work because you can't afford to live close to your job, if you're living in, a drafty, poorly insulated house, as much of our housing stock is, that's not good for the environment. If we can't build green energy, if we can't build wind farms, if we can't build nuclear power stations because of planning reforms, and therefore we're reliant on fossil fuels like natural gas, that's not good for the environment. And it's planning reforms that are stopping us from building enough housing. It's the planning system rather that's stopping us from building enough housing, stopping us from building enough infrastructure. So I don't think we actually do need to set it up as a contest between the environment and planning reform and economic growth. And I think actually the current sort of piecemeal regulations we have around the environment in the planning system are actually not that effective. And it would make much more sense to allow developers to pay into this central pot, because you can make a much bigger impact, to build a big kind of natural environment away from the built environment that's dedicated to creating these natural habitats. You can create a much more positive difference for the environment doing that than kind of protecting one species of newt near a housing estate you're building. So I think this is good from the government, and I think it's the right approach.
Yes, well, that's the argument they will try to win with these planning rules. Also in the political sphere, Jack, Reform UK banning local branches from organising events on WhatsApp, and the sort of implication is that they're trying to do this to stop entryism, particularly from the far right, avoid embarrassing sort of news stories like that. Is it an admission from Reform UK, though, that it is vulnerable to falling into the hands of the far right, and perhaps that it attracts people with those sorts of views?
Yeah, I think possibly. I mean, I think political parties in general can often attract an unsavory type of person. And I mean, we've seen in the past few years the problems that WhatsApp can cause just by having a record of everything that's been said, and that can get leaked to the press or come out in subsequent inquiries. I think what's interesting, though, is Reform just has such a centralized power structure, whether that's the fact that all the control is kind of exerted by Nigel Farage. We know that they were a company for a while. There's not much kind of devolved power, even within Westminster. There doesn't seem to be much kind of power in anyone in the Reform Parliamentary Party other than Nigel Farage. And this is kind of an example of that. It's a very top-down structure, and I think that's all well and good when you're a small populist force. But if you actually want to become a party of government, if you want to win an election, then you need people across the country who have power to take decisions, to act independently. And I think this is the sort of control freakery that could really come back to bite Reform and make them very unwieldy in an election campaign.
Yes, and I think it touches on two things about Reform's growth. One is the professionalisation of a political party, which you've touched on there. How do you expand that on a mass scale so quickly, like they're planning to do? And also, how do you build a broad enough voter coalition that gets you across the line to actually win elections rather than just become a big opposition party? More politics, social media news. I am not on TikTok, Jack. I don't know if you are. If there was ever an advert not to be on TikTok, it's things like this, I think.
So there's new statistics out that show that almost half of Brits think that our country is becoming lawless. Well, I'm not surprised.
That is Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, doing what they call a walk and talk. You have these politicians, and it's not just Robert Jenrick. I hasten to add Ed Miliband, Kemi Badenoch. I think David Cameron used to do them, apparently, in the Foreign Office when he was Foreign Secretary, looming towards you, walking down a corridor, trying to get their point of view across. How do you feel about this TikTok walk and talk? Is it an authentic way for politicians to reach a new audience?
I'm not on TikTok either. I think it's an awful way to spend one's time, and I viscerally hate these walk and talks. But I think, unfortunately, it is politicians really meeting the electorate where they're at. You know, most under 40s are now consuming at least some news through TikTok, and so politicians kind of have to respond to that. And we've seen, you know, we were talking about reform before. We've seen that they've been particularly effective at reaching audiences on TikTok, and other politicians do have to follow suit. I think really we should be scrutinizing politicians for their message, and if they're using these walk and talks to be inauthentic, to kind of have these kind of smooth camera angles and stuff to actually distract from the fact that they're not really saying anything at all, that's bad. But unfortunately, I think we kind of have to get used to the genre and accept that it's part of modern politics.
And inauthenticity is not a new gripe with politicians' communications. And finally, Jack, we've got a whole load of new words added to the Cambridge Dictionary. Among them, tradwife, a sort of portmanteau of traditional wife, a married woman, stays at home, does the cooking, cleaning, often on social media. Delulu, believing things that are real or not real or true, usually because you choose to. Here, beautifully used by the Australian Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese.
Well, Mr. Speaker, they are delulu with no salulu, Mr. Speaker. They are completely delusional.
That's him talking about his Conservative opposition leader, Peter Dutton. My personal gripe with this year's words, skibbity, which can mean cool or bad, or frankly can have no meaning at all. Surely words need a definition to be in the dictionary.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that it's a sign of the times that you've got a word that can mean absolutely anything in there. The very point of the dictionary is to kind of find out what words actually mean, and that's far too open to interpretation. I hadn't even heard that word until this morning, but I don't think I'll be using it in my daily life.
Well, we aim to educate on Times Radio. Jack Rowlett, political commentator, thank you very much for your time this morning to go through the papers.